Now, the Bank of Ghana's loss of more than 60 billion cedis was due to domestic debt exchange program, which the country recently undertook prior to the IMF bailout. The BoG is said to have spent almost 70 million cedis on computer-related expenses, 131 million cedis for motor and vehicle maintenance, and also 97 million cedis for foreign and domestic travels, among others. Speaking with Pius Kojobaka, the Director of Research at the BoG, Philip Abradu Otu, said the bank took a 50% principal haircut on its non-marketable instrument, which was around 64.5 billion cedi. According to him, despite the loss, the bank is still in a position to discharge its mandate of pursuing price stability.
There were three key items, if you'd permit me to explain. So as a result of the domestic debt exchange, we had a 50% principal haircut on our non-marketable instruments, which was around 64.5 billion. So we took a haircut of 50. But remember, no other institution, the private sector and the banks did not take a haircut in all of this. It is the Bank of Ghana that has been the shock absorber to the domestic debt exchange to ensure that we return to debt sustainability over the medium term. As I was explaining, we have the marketable instruments, the non-marketable instrument, and COCOBOD's loans to BoG were all put in the perimeter of the debt exchange, and that resulted for the loss. These three items alone accounted for 53.1 billion out of the loss of 60.8. This is close to 90% of the loss. And you cannot say that the domestic debt exchange has not had any impact. It's purely a domestic debt exchange impact on our balance sheet. Yes, of course, there were other things, but those other things were very minor on our balance sheet. Yes, we have a negative equity. We think you shouldn't be worried because I think the issue that arises is whether the bank will continue to be policy solvent. It's an issue of policy solvency. And with policy solvency, the issue is whether we can continue to discharge our mandate of pursuing price stability and financial stability despite the negative equity. And the answer is yes, we can. So we can do that. Policy solvency requires realized revenues to cover costs and build longer-term capital reserves. But I think that is not to say that, yes, we don't need to recover. We will have to recover as we move along. But will we be policy solvent as we move on? I think, yes, we will be policy solvent. But again, we also need to recognize that we are putting in place steps and actions to ensure that we return back to positive levels. So some of the measures that we are putting in place is that we'll be retaining profits to build capital back up. We'll then be optimizing the Bank of Ghana's investment portfolio and operating cost mix to bolster efficiency. And then again, I think you said this at the beginning of your program, we will be making an assessment for the potential need for recapitalization support from the government in the medium term.
Now, earlier, the minority in Parliament served notice that will subject some recent expenditure made by the Bank of Ghana to value for money audit. According to acting ranking member on the Finance Committee, Isaac Adongo, a future NDC government will probe these expenditures.
And I want to tell Deloitte and Touch that we are paying attention to its work at the Bank of Ghana and that it should apply the full impact of the regulatory violations. They cannot go and do this type of work. And I want to tell Dr. Addison that in future we will subject these numbers to value for money audits.
Now, Isaac Adongo also insists a purported write-off of debt owed by the government as void because Parliament did not approve of it by a resolution.
The so-called write-off of 32 billion is inconsequential. It has no parliamentary approval. And as a matter of fact, the accounts should be restated as prior year actions next year when the auditors get back there, because there is no parliamentary approval. We have not written off any 32 million. Of course, impairment, we don't have a problem with impairment, because that is a standard accounting practice. But write-off, they must come under Section 53 of the Public Financial Management Act.
But how confident?
I'm waiting.
But how confident can we be in the assurance from the Bank of Ghana? Dr. Richmond Etuahene is a banking consultant, and he joins us via Zoom. Now, grateful to you for joining us, sir. The BoG says they are not to blame for what happened. Isn't that a reality looking at what happened to the economy?
Thank you very much, Grace. Reality is a bit subjective. The point is that the law says it clearly that you shouldn't do 10% of your past revenue. And the fiscal discipline, the fiscal responsibility, I say that we shouldn't do 5%. So if you breach the law and you decided to do it, I don't think it's the reality. The reality is that if they needed to do that, why wouldn't they seek an approval from the parliament, prior approval from parliament? And parliament could have used its power and say, look, do what you were expected to do. But it's not when you do it and you tell us that whether you're right or wrong. I think that is why the parliament is there. When you were going to have the overdraft financing government, there was nothing that stopped them from taking it to parliament to seek prior approval before what they did. Unfortunately, it wasn't done. So for me, it is neither here nor there.
Okay. Now, they are assuring us that they are in control and are putting in place measures to return to positive levels. What are the critical things that the Bank of Ghana should look at?
Hello?
Doc, I can hear you. If you can hear me, I'm trying to find out from you that as the Bank of Ghana is assuring that they are in control and are putting in place measures to return to positive levels, what are the critical things that they need to consider in their effort to return to positive levels? Doc, I'm trying to find out from you, with your knowledge of the dealings of the Bank of Ghana, what should they do, or the critical things they need to pay attention to as they engage in practices or they implement effort to try and ensure that they return to positive levels?
Well, in positive levels, as Abradi Otu said, you have to look at retention. But retention will take you a considerable time. Even if I average the 1.5 over the last 5 years and divide it by the losses, it will take you close to 42 years before, if you retain everything. But in accounting, you don't retain everything in reserves. So it is not possible to retain everything.
Okay.
Another one that he said that they want to rationalization. I mean, look at efficiency and rationalization. It's a good thing. But the most important thing for me is that if we have stick to the law, we wouldn't have found ourselves. So now that the IMF is telling us zero financing, and it's an IMF order, they will stick to it and they will never finance the government physical debt. If they do that, maybe we'll be able to. But however, there is no way, because if you look at the IMF policy documents, if you wouldn't mind, IMF country report 23168, I think page 42 or thereabout, says that Bank of Ghana would have to do the DDEP. And after that, the Bank of Ghana and the government should seek to recapitalize the central bank.
Okay.
That is what is in the book. It is in the whole work. So it is not somebody who is telling us that they are going to recapitalize. The question is that they have to recapitalize. Because you see, they said policy credibility. Fine. But in the eyes of who?
Okay.
It's not in the eyes of Ghanaians. It's in the eyes of your correspondent banks. The Federal Reserve of US, the Bank of England, the Eurozone, where you keep your money. They will look at you whether you wet the salt. But if you say policy solvent, you're not dealing with only Ghanaians. You're dealing with international businesses.
Okay.
So you must make sure.
All right.
And again, let me finish. Again, this fiscal, it's going to add fiscal pressure to already the public finance. Because if the government decide to finance it or recapitalize it, it's going to add to the debt, which will not help us to achieve the 60% debt to GDP ratio set in the IMF policy document.
Very tough times ahead of us. Grateful to you, Doc, for joining us here. Now, still staying with